in this lecture, but when you're developing a system, so an app, a spreadsheet, a piece of software, just a generic system, it's very easy to have a view of it really as a lot of different components sort of all acting together. So you might have, say, you've got the hardware, might have a database associated with it, you've got lots of different libraries you might be linking into, but it's sometimes very easy to lose sight of the fact of sort of the bigger picture, which is while you have these systems which are just a grouping of many different technologies, but in the end, any system you develop, the real key, I suppose, focus should be the end users. So rather than just the technologies or systems that you're using to develop a given system, when you're doing so, you need to be focusing on the end users. So if you develop a system, it's eventually going to be used by someone to fulfill some purpose. If there's not a purpose behind having built something, then that kind of defeats the point of building it in the first place. So you can have lots of different types of users as well. So this is something that's, again, sometimes a little easy to overlook. You can have, a given system might have many different users, and those users may perform a variety of very different roles. Some users might, the roles for certain users might overlap. For other users, they might perform, say, a very single specific role. For example, users could be, you might have something like, say, the owner of a system. So an owner may not, in fact, be someone who really interacts with the system. Let's give as an example something like e-learning or Sydney Student. So a system I'm sure you'd all be familiar with, just for enrolling or administering your coursework. The owner of this might be, I suppose you could say, the University of Sydney. Well, I suppose the administration at Sydney, a lot of the higher-ups, they're not going to really interact with this very much. It's much more for the people either directly administering the courses themselves or for you, the students. So again, that you have people in a sort of more administrative role where you're using this to supply content and to administer coursework. You have sort of more consumer-oriented users, like, say, yourselves, where you're using these systems to try and get information out. A system needs to cater to all of these different users. You have to consider who's going to be using the system, how they're going to be interacting with it, what they need to do, and how you can go about supporting that. And it's very easy sometimes to focus overmuch on a specific subset of users and really neglect to create features or that are really essential for certain subgroups of users. And you can create systems that are great for some people but horrible for others. So how do users see information systems? So how will users go about, I suppose, or how should one evaluate an information system from the point of view of a user? So I suppose there's three key criteria, or three criteria that a user might evaluate a system with respect to. You have its usefulness, so how well does it fit, well, how useful is it to a given user? How usable is the system, and also subjective appeal. So usefulness, you have how well does the system do the job that you're trying to use it to do. So, I mean, going back to what I said before, if the system, no one can actually use your system to perform a useful task, then you've defeated the purpose of creating it in the first place. So does the system facilitate the tasks for which the user, or for which users are attempting to use it? Does it make them more efficient? So efficiency, and I suppose I'll tie this in with the next point, additional power. So that's another point of these systems. So you could have something that facilitates a certain task, but it may be, for example, no easier or quicker than doing it another way, another existing way. For example, think about something like, say, spreadsheets. If you go back in time and you think about the way accounting and those types of tasks would have been done before the advent of spreadsheets. Those were tasks that still had to be done, but they're done manually, paper-based, people writing down numbers and adding up figures, basically. So that's where you have something like, say, a spreadsheet. It enables the user to do those type of tasks much, much faster, much more efficiently. It removes many possibilities of error. So that's where you have something that not only enables them to become more efficient, but there's actually additional power. So when you get to, say, data analysis of large groups or of large amounts of information. So we actually have a unit at the end of this on spreadsheets, and that's something that we try and focus on there, is the ability to perform a little bit of data analysis using tools provided in some spreadsheet software like Excel. So essentially, does the system enable the user to get more out of the data than what they're putting in, or does it enable them to, does it give them the ability to do more with than, say, or existing approaches did? So usability. So how easy is a system to actually use and learn? So this is, I've got a few slides on this later in the lecture, essentially how easy is that, or there are many important points to do with usability, because you have usability is different for different users. You have, for instance, you might have a novice user. If, let's say, you've never used this system before, a user might evaluate your system with respect to how easy is it for them to just pick it up and work out how they can go about performing their desired task without having to spend ages learning the system. A good example here, going on with the student admin example I had before, might be, say, changing your timetable on e-learning or through e-learning. You might, let's say you're a first year student, you might have no experience using this system, but you want to change your timetable. You're fairly clear about what the task you're trying to perform is. I'd say a good user interface design for that type of a system should enable you to pick up fairly quickly without really having to spend a lot of time, either asking for help or working out how to use it. You should be able to sit down and fairly quickly go about changing your timetable. So you might evaluate a system with respect to how easy it is to sit down and pick up. You might have a system, say, that is catered more towards, it's going to be used by a small group of people, but they're going to become very, very familiar with your software. So essentially you could then evaluate the system with respect to how well does it facilitate an expert user performing tasks very, very quickly. You might have, for example, a task that it's very intuitive to perform, but it takes ages because you've got to go through 5 or 6 screens, input a lot of redundant information, click and go through some menus. If you've never used the system before, you probably don't care about this too much. You're going to be going reasonably slowly anyway. If you're using this every day and you're a power user, you might be looking for things like shortcuts. So again, you might evaluate it with respect to how usable is it for a power user. And again, user-friendly is, in that sense, a kind of subjective thing, or it's different things to different people. So that's something that you do need to consider when it comes to the usability of systems, is consider different users, how they will interact with the system, and how it will cater to the different groups of users you might encounter. And subjective appeal is also a thing. If you have a really functional site, but it's ugly as sin and really quite frustrating to use, people will, again, evaluate it with respect to that. So again, this is somewhat subjective. And one thing here, though, is also similarity to other products used. So again, if you're developing a new system, it can be kind of useful to try and come up with an interface that is similar or is not going to be completely alien to its users. This again presents, it's useful in that it helps in terms of usability, but if users sit down to a system that's completely alien, it might be a good idea, but they're going to find they might be inclined to react less favourably. An example might be, actually, interested in just a quick straw poll. Who here uses a keyboard layout other than QWERTY? Does anyone here use, say, Dvorak for any of their computers? Okay, well, I've got a few friends who use Dvorak, for example. If I were to sit down and try and do anything, there's nothing better or worse, I suppose you could say, about QWERTY versus Dvorak versus other keyboard layouts. But I would say that myself and probably quite a lot of other people would possibly be negatively or a little negatively inclined towards a system that forced me to use say, a keyboard layout I wasn't familiar with. It's nothing better or worse, but the barrier to starting up with the system is potentially something that could be seen as quite frustrating and could evoke a negative reaction. So yeah, just to reiterate what I said before, you have any given system is going to have a number of different components all interacting together, but as far as the user is concerned, they really just see the user interface that you present to them. So the actual working components of a system are abstracted from the user. What they really just see is a box, and they interact with that box through the interface you provide. So you need to make that interface both useful to ensure that the user is able to get the full functionality out of the system or be able to perform all the tasks that they need, intuitive, and essentially you just want a good user interface design. You want the users to be able to perform the tasks they need quickly and easily. So there's a number of, what I'm going to do now is go through a number of factors that influence a good design, or that that you need to consider when coming up with a design if you want to develop a good UI. So first I'll go through operational considerations. So this is more to do with sort of the way in which the system actually works, so not specifically user focused, but productivity demands. So a good user interface should essentially scale to meet or enable users to be able to process a decent volume of data, or process a realistic volume of data. A good example here might be something like, say, emails. So some people, the volume of emails a person might receive can vary greatly. Someone might get just a couple of emails a day. Other people might get easily tens of thousands. So what you need to do in that case is you need to facilitate or provide a user interface that enables, say, the user receiving a lot of email to be able to quickly move groups of emails around. Let's say you had a large amount of spam, and you needed to delete them. A poor interface, to give a simplistic example, might be one where every deletion had to be done. You select an individual email, right-click, delete. Individual email, right-click, delete. That's quite a poor interface because it's not going to scale very well. It doesn't really allow you to get much throughput, I suppose you could say. Having an interface that enables you to select a group of emails and perform a batch operation, so select these, copy them, or delete them, that's a much better design there, or it's a feature that should be included. Things like specific task demands. So consider what the users will be doing and how they will be interacting with your system. So, for example, let's say you've got a tablet device where it's working on a touch screen. This device might be used by someone, say, performing some kind of field work. So they might be wearing gloves or something like that, which could then make it very, very hard to be able to effectively use the touch screen. So this can be a thing if you develop an app for someone performing field work, and it requires very fine control via a touch interface. Then that may be not particularly very useful for them, or it might be problematic. Special data quality requirements, not as relevant for the things you'll do in this course, but if, say, you're dealing with, say, something in engineering, again, well, I mentioned the example of field work. You might have some kind of someone who's collecting data and there's a high degree of or high cost for errors in that data, so something say medical or engineering or something like that. So you can try and encode some kind of validation or error checking into the interface, so ensure that it supports, I suppose, again, to give a very, very simplistic example, ensure that the user can see what they've entered, verify that it is in fact correct. If, let's say, you've just got, bring up a keyboard and allow the user to type in what they have, but it moves off the screen so quickly they can't really see what they've typed, so that might be problematic. Security requirements. So with a good example here is with a lot of systems where you enter a password, you'll see that the password is not actually displayed. Some phone apps will display just one letter and then hide it after a second. A lot of apps or websites you go to will just display a dot for each character. Some systems won't display anything, so you type the password, it just gives no feedback. This can be, again, just for security purposes. If you're typing in a password and someone's sitting there watching you, you don't want them to be able to read what your password is off the screen while you're typing it. Consistency with other software in use. This ties in with need to comply with an existing standard. So a good example here might be, let's say I was writing a text editor and for Windows, and I decided to make a copy function or copy feature. And I'm going to add a shortcut, which is Control-K. And that's going to annoy a lot of people because Windows applications, by default, copy is Control-C. If I'm using almost any application I use, if it's Windows, if I want to copy something, I will just default hit Control-C. If I expect it to support copy, then I expect Control-C to be a shortcut for it. This is something that, again, it's basically just a standard. It's a standard feature, so that's something that you need to comply with existing standards, and if you deviate from these, that's going to be a potential barrier to the usability of your system. Need to satisfy market demands, so that's essentially, does your design fit a realistic need, and ability to port to other platforms and browsers. So again, you don't want to prescribe to users the types of software that they need to use to interact with your system. So for example, if you're developing a website and it only works on Chrome, a lot of users are going to come to it with Internet Explorer, a lot are going to use Firefox, a lot are going to use Safari. It's very realistic that they will load your site, something will break, and they'll blame you rather than the browser. So you need to think about who your users are, how they want to interact with your site, and to the best of your ability, support that. So some additional user-related considerations, so less about your design of the site, but more about the features that you offer and the users that it might be interacting with. Consider the level of expertise of the users. So if you've got a lot of novice users, it might be worthwhile having a very clear interface, some help menus, just an interface that supports novice users and supports someone who doesn't necessarily know or hasn't used it before. You might have users who, you might be designed for a small user base of people who will become very, very familiar with the system. In that case, you can probably forego really nice, clean, or you can forego a lot of features that you might otherwise include, and provide just a lot of shortcuts and a lot of ways for these expert users to be able to perform the tasks that they will want to do with your system very, very quickly and easily. Frequency of staff turnover is an interesting one. So this is essentially training time. How long does it take for someone to become familiar with your system? That second example I gave there, where you have users who are perhaps perhaps expert, but they'll interact with this system a lot, so they're going to become expert users. If, let's say, it takes those 6 months to become familiar with the system, and people only work, and they're taking on new staff regularly, like there's a reasonable turnover, that's perhaps less than ideal. So you have to consider not just how an expert user will be able to interact with your system, but how long does it take someone to become an expert user may be relevant. Availability of suitable training, technical support, and again, subjective preferences. So there's still 5 minutes, so I'll run through a few points. we will have a few slides left over, not too many hopefully. So there's actually quite a lot of research into user interface design. There's courses you can take at the end of, if you go on to do even honours level computer science in the School of IT, there's courses on user interface design you can take in quite senior years. So this is going back to a paper by Constantine from 1994. You have the Great Law of Usability, which is essentially that a system should be usable by someone who is inexperienced with the system but knowledgeable in the domain area. So go back to the example I gave earlier about changing your timetable. You know what your timetable is and you know what you want to do, you just don't know how to use the system yet. It should be intuitive for you. So cater to first-time users. And it should should not substantially impede or interfere with the efficiency of an expert user. So this goes to, say, the example I had with like fieldwork or something, where you've got someone who's going to be very familiar with the system. You don't want to make them have to go through a whole bunch of menus just to be able to perform routine tasks. You want them to be able to perform their tasks quickly and efficiently once they know what they want to do. So do think of power users.